Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for just allowing us to be able to get together and to get into your word and have a meal and spend this time in fellowship. We ask you to just open our hearts and our minds to what you want us to glean from this and that we would apply it to our lives. And we just pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen. All right, let's get into it. We are in the book of Isaiah. All right, and one of the things that we've been able to point out in the book of Isaiah is that you have this dialogue going on between the prophet and God. Isaiah has experienced 62 plus years, and he's approaching the way of teaching doctrine in a lot of different ways. He's got a lot of different images he's going with. He's got a lot of different approaches he's going with. And sometimes when he speaks, God just interjects. And that's one of the special things about Isaiah. Anything that stuck out to you guys? Have y'all been in the study?
But this book kind of starts off a little differently. It started off with a prophecy, and then, like just last week, we heard about how Isaiah was called and the beginning of his ministry, so we didn't even, not exactly in chronological order.
No, it's not in chronological order at all.
And then we also got that rare glimpse into how God holds court in heaven, which is always cool to me.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Carmel, anything stick out to you?
Looking back.
Pulling up the notes. What about you, Patty? Did you get to hear anything?
I haven't been able to get much out of it.
There you go.
Sorry.
All right, so let's. Oh wait, you wait for Carmel's notes.
You can go ahead. I'll chime in.
Okay. All right, so we are in Isaiah 8. And just to recover what we did the last time we were, like Chantel said, we were invited to God's throne room. Then we got into chapter 7, where there's this judgment that was coming because Judah was threatened by Israel and Syria teaming up together to fight against Judah. And so God's judgment was frustrating their plans. And then finally God says, let me show you a sign. And then the king is trying to act all holy. He's like, no, I won't ask the sign of God. And God was like, would you stop? Please, right? So then he shows him a sign, and it's that famous verse that we remember. The virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you should call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us, right? So we get these prophecies. And now we'll get into chapter 8. And let's read chapter 8.
Then the Lord said to me, take a large tablet and write on it in common characters belonging to Maher-shalal-Hashbaz, and I will get reliable witnesses, Uriah the priest and Zechariah, the son of Jeberechiah, to attest for me. And I went to the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. Then the Lord said to me, call his name Maher-shalal-Hashbaz, for before the boy knows how to cry, my father, or my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Syria. The Lord spoke to me again, because this people had refused the waters of Shiloh that flow gently, and rejoice over Rezin and the son of Remaliah. Therefore, behold, the Lord is bringing up against them the waters of the river, mighty and many, the king of Assyria and all his glory. And it will rise over all its channels and go over all its banks, and will sweep on into Judah. It will overflow and pass on, reaching even to the neck, and its outspread wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. Be broken, you peoples, and be shattered. Give ear, all you far countries. Strap on your armor and be shattered. Strap on your armor and be shattered. Take counsel together, but it will come to nothing. Speak a word, but it will not stand, for God is with us.
You can continue reading the rest of the chapter.
For the Lord spoke thus to me with his strong hand upon me, and warned me not to walk in the way of this people, saying, do not call conspiracy all that this people calls conspiracy, and do not fear what they fear, nor be in dread. But the Lord of hosts, him you shall honor as holy. Let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. And he will become a sanctuary, a stone of offense, and a rock of stumbling to both houses of Israel. a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many shall stumble upon it. They shall fall and be broken. They shall be snared and taken. Bind up the testimony, seal the teaching among my disciples. I will wait for the Lord, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob. I will hope in him. Behold, I and the children whom the Lord has given me are signs and portents in Israel from the Lord of hosts, who dwells on Mount Zion. And when they say to you, inquire of the mediums and the necromancers who chirp and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God? Should they inquire of the dead on behalf of the living? To the teaching and to the testimony. If they will not speak according to this word, it is because they have no dawn. They will pass through the land, greatly distressed and hungry. And when they are hungry, they will be enraged and will speak contemptuously against their king and their God, and turn their faces upward. And they will look to earth, but behold, distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish, and they will be thrust into thick darkness.
All right, let's get into chapter 8. Chapter 8 is not a positive prophecy, but it's some depth into it, right? Let's just think about what happens at the very first part. We get this super long name, which we can laugh about, right?
I think that's the longest name in the Bible.
Yep.
Did I
And
say
that's
it right? I have no idea.
yeah. Well, it really none of us truly know how to pronounce the Hebrew, right? So, but this super long name, what does it mean? And what we're going to see is when you go through this passage, you're going to see lots of things that are shocking in the sense, let's just say it this way, lots of unexpected things. The phrases are unexpected. And so let's just break it down, some of the unexpected things. The Lord first says to him, take a tablet and write these comic characters belonging to, and then, no, right, we write a tablet. And what are you saying belonging to this name? Right, belonging to this name. This name is long. What does the name mean? Well, if you look in your footnotes, you'll see it means the spoil speeds, the prey hastens. All right? Which is not good, right? You're going to put this sign up on somebody's house, and it's going to say the victim is running. Right? The victim is running. This belongs to the victim who's running. But he's still going to be a victim. And the idea is the prey is running. He's still going to get caught, right? Because you called him prey. He's not going to escape. The idea that, hey, a victim, that person is going to be a victim, they're running. Is the idea that they're already going to be victimized, right? The fate is sealed. This belongs to these people whose fate is sealed. And who does he get? He gets some people to be reliable witnesses, a priest, and then another person who's notable. And they attest for it. So he writes these signs, and then the next thing he does for his prophecy, and you might be surprised by this, but then he gets his wife pregnant, right? And so he says, write this sign, and then whose name is that sign? It's his own son. It's his own son. He names his son based off of this prophecy. His other son, if you look earlier, his other son has a name that's based on prophecy too. Look at chapter 7, verse 3. It says, go out and meet Ahaz, you and Share-Jabezeb, your son. What does Share-Jabezeb mean? It means a remnant will return. Is he playing with these names? He ain't playing with these names, right? That means that every time that you met Isaiah, everything that came from Isaiah pointed to God. Everything. Even his kids' names, right? So he's sitting there, and you sitting there and say, hey, Isaiah, and a remnant shall return. Right? You cringe. Then it's, oh, he got a new son. What's his name? The prey is running. The spoil is fast. Is he talking about us? Yeah, it's us. And the prophecy is, okay, why are you calling him that name? Well, because before he can say mom and dad, Israel's going to be plundered and taken away. What? Right? That's the first prophecy. The wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Assyria. Then the Lord speaks again. He says, what? What's the problem? Well, the problem is that Israel, they've never trusted in the Lord. Now, remember the history books that we went through. What was the biggest problem with Israel versus Judah? Anybody remember? Israel broke away when what king stupidly said that he would have his finger will be thicker than his father's waist.
Rehoboam?
Yeah, Rehoboam said. Right? Solomon, at the end of his life, to keep up the luxury that he had, started raising taxes. And the people was like, okay, you got to lessen this. And Rehoboam was like, nope, taxes going up. They was like, what? They left. So 10 tribes left and went after who? Rise of Rehoboam? Jeroboam, right? So Jeroboam gets the 10 tribes, and now he's afraid because in Jewish religion, they have to meet 3 times a day, and guess where? Jerusalem, the capital city of Judah. So he's like, they have the opportunity to win the people over 3 times a year. How can I stop that? I know what I'll do. I'll set up a golden calf. And I'll call his name Jehovah. And people can worship that golden calf instead of going all the way down to Jerusalem. They can worship that. And I'll set up my own priesthood. Right? So the Levites, they're going to always be loyal to the throne of David. And they're always going to be loyal because that's where the temple is. The palace is right next to the temple, right? So I'm going to establish my own temple, and I'll establish my own line of priests. Anybody can be a priest, right? Think of him as the first people that established a female pastor, right? Anybody could be a pastor. Anybody could be a priest in northern Israel. Now, because of that, they never truly could rely on God to protect them because they never truly sought God. They never got rid of that false religion. Never. That's why there are no Israel kings that are listed as good. The best one they had was Jehu. Even he is not necessarily considered to be good. He's just not necessarily as bad as others. Some of them went so far as to go back from the evil wickedness that Ahab had did, but Ahab had taken it way beyond. Some of them even sacrificed their children, things like that. Some of them walked that back. But none of them truly recognized that the only true worship was in the temple of God that Solomon had built. And so because of that, they could never truly rely on God. Think of what happened with Ahab. Remember the sermon I gave a couple of weeks ago? Ahab had a threat of Syria. So what did Ahab do? He couldn't really reach out to God because he was killing every prophet. It kind of reminds us a little bit of Saul. Saul at one point could no longer call on the Lord. Why? Because he killed all the priests. He had no right to seek after God, so what did he do? Went to the necromancers. When people turn away from God, that doesn't mean they turn away from all spirituality. They still are going to seek something. Now Israel seeks 2 things. Just like Saul, we'll look at how they seek after necromancers and things like that a little bit later. But the first thing that we'll notice is they seek after alliances. Syria, if you look at the history of Ahab, was terrible to Israel. But now they face a common threat. What's that common threat? Assyria. Nineveh. Way stronger than Syria ever was. So now they're sitting there like, man, we got to fight these Assyrians. What can we do against them? Now, the Babylonians, they're not even thinking about them yet because they're still starting. The Medes and the Persians haven't even started yet. But the Assyrians are strong. Everybody's talking about these Assyrians. Let's ally with Syria. We'll call on them. And so the prophecy is, because you love the rivers of Syria, right? I'm going to destroy you with the river of Assyria. What's the river of Assyria? Anybody remember it?
Mine says the name.
What is it?
Mine's Euphrates.
Yep, the Euphrates. The Euphrates is known as one of the biggest rivers, right? There are a few rivers that are known to be extremely famous. The Nile River, the Euphrates, the Amazon River, right? There's a few that are just super known. Even the Mississippi River, you can say that's really well known.
And it's like, wasn't it 2 rivers, Euphrates, and another one they say like in between those 2 was like really, really fertile land.
Yes. Yep.
That was really good.
Big old rivers, huge rivers that basically the cradle of civilization is said it came from there. And he's saying, you think you're gonna chase after this river instead of the gentle rivers of Israel? I'm gonna give you even worse. I'm gonna give you this roaring river that's gonna run away from you. It will sweep not only Israel, but it's also gonna knock into Judah. It will overflow and pass on, reaching even to the neck. And its outstreams wings will feel the breath of your land, O Emmanuel. Who is he talking to? He's talking to Jesus, right? He's sitting there on his throne. God is sitting there on his throne. And he said, it's going to even happen to you, God with us. Mm-hmm. He even talking to Jesus. And Jesus is like, yeah, that's terrible that my land got to suffer judgment because of these people. One thing that we never think about is, do the judgments that we face, do they hurt God? And I don't mean hurt him in the sense that it's causing him pain, but does it hurt him in the sense that he's hurting? How can we say it this way? When God judges us, does part of him resent the fact that he's got to do that? Right? There's a part of him that is looking there and saying, oh, my people, why do you keep doing this? A church will get judged because it has to be judged. But I know God, and you see this constantly, this thought, why don't you repent and turn away? The judgment is not inevitable, but because you will not return, it is. Why? That's why you almost get this idea that God is sitting on his throne and Jesus is next to him and he's saying, it's going to even hit your people, Emmanuel. He's like, yeah.
You think that's kind of in the same vein of when we were talking, when we were going through some of the history books about when the phrase, like, then God, what was it? He repented, it was something else.
Yep.
Regretted, that's
yep.
what it was. He said he regretted that he had made man, and he regretted
yep.
that he had done this. We're saying not regret, like he thought he made a mistake or
yep.
something wrong. It was just like, I wish it didn't come to this for you guys.
Yes. The complexity of the thought, right?
Yeah.
The complexity of the thought that God, in some senses, when he judges us, it's almost like he's flicking his own wrist.
Well, I mean, we feel a little bit of that too. Like with our kids, like I know sometimes that I get tired of punishing them for the same thing,
yep.
or like just why won't you just listen? I'm tired of doing this. I'm tired of seeing this happen to you, but I have to keep
yep.
doing it.
I remember when AJ was first born, we didn't have the TV mounted. He just kept touching the TV, and that was a spanking all the time. The reason it was a spanking was because if he tipped the TV, he'd be dead, right? Mm-hmm. So, but he was always touching the TV, and then he would run away, and he couldn't run. And it was just one of those things where it's like, why do you do this? I regret that I even have this TV. Because all it's doing is becoming a thing that I have to spank you for. But it just was something that's just interesting. The idea that God will judge, but at the same time, he's kind of like, I wish I didn't have to do that. Now here we get into those shocking parts. The rest of the passage is going to be these parts that seem like it leads to somewhere else. Like it's saying jump so you can go down kind of stuff.
Right, you read it, and that's kind of how you feel.
Yes, that's how you feel, because the first part says, be broken, you people, and be shattered. You hear all you far countries. Now you first hear the condemnation. The first condemnation is, you're going to be broken. Give ear. Why would you give ear just to hear that you're going to be destroyed, right? So that's the first part that's a little bit surprising, but it's not all that surprising until the next part. Strap on your armor and be shattered. That's the part, right? You would never think that you would strap on your armor just to get destroyed. That's not what you do. If you was going to get destroyed, why strap it on at all? But it talks about the fact that they're going to face it and think that they're going to have victory, and that's the judgment. The judgment is that they think they can actually stop this, and they can't. The next one, strap on your armor and be shattered twice. Take counsel together. Right? Get good advice. Hey, y'all, get good. The best advice you can. It ain't going to work. Now, that's another one, right? Get good advice, but it will come to nothing. Speak a word, but it will not stand. For God is with us. Do all you want to. Scheme all you want to. Put on your armor. Fight as hard as you can. It won't do anything. And I think that's the scary part, is the inevitability of God's judgment. Imagine somebody that you knew was going to hell. And there wasn't nothing that they were going to do in their life that was going to change that. And imagine them struggling with the best of their effort not to be saved, but simply to fight against God's judgment, and you know it's still coming. There's no escaping it. It kind of feels like Final Destination. You're going to die. You will die. This is another part. He talks about why are we going to think about this? How we're going to think about this judgment. He started talking privately with Isaiah. And this again, we get to those parts that seem contradictory. The Lord spoke thus to me with his strong hand upon me. Warn me not to walk in the way of this people. Don't walk like these people. Do not call a conspiracy everything they call a conspiracy. Do not fear what they fear, nor be in dread. What does it mean to call something a conspiracy? To say that it's caused by men, right? If we thought that the judgment of God was caused by men, we would mistake the cause of what is causing what's happening, right? We would mistake the original source. Now later on we're going to see that in chapter 10 that even the people who are using judgment will mistake the source of the judgment. But we maybe get a little bit ahead of ourselves, but sometimes people will look and not realize that the punch that God sent is delivered by somebody else. And they blame the person who punching them and not God who sent them. I know that seems like a little bit of a crude example, but we can think of it in the sense that if God sends you to tell somebody to stop sinning, they're not mad at God, they're mad at you. They think you personally hate them, or you're personally stopping them from enjoying life. You're personally upsetting their day. It's like, no, God sent me. Be mad at him. Now they are mad at him, but they don't recognize them. Do not fear these people, but the Lord, him you shall honor. Let him be your fear, let him be your dread. Again, we get into that territory. It's strange, right? Let him be your joy, let him be your fear, let him be your dread. What does it mean for the Lord to be your dread? Take judgment seriously. He will become a sanctuary and a stone of offense. Again, right? You got these things going up against each other. A sanctuary is a place you go to for safety. What's a stone of offense? Something you trip over. A rock of stumbling to both houses. What is that talking about? That's got to be Jesus, right? That has to be Jesus. How did they trip over Jesus? Well, everybody in Jerusalem tripped over Jesus. They all tried to kill Jesus. After Jesus had died and rose again, they all tried to kill the apostles. They resisted them all the way to the end. To this day, they still trip over Jesus. They still resist him. He was meant to be a sanctuary. He became a stone of offense. Here's another one. Look at verse 16. Bind up the testimony. Who binds a testimony? Wouldn't you want to make a testimony publicly known? Seal my teaching amongst my disciples. Why would you seal a teaching? Wouldn't the teaching be something that you would want to proclaim? But how is this fulfilled? How is this fulfilled with the Holy Spirit? You got to think of it in this sense. That when God reveals truths to us, he doesn't reveal it to everybody else. God is the only one who could shout and whisper at the same time. He can make a sound that everybody can hear, but he can also make it only known to those who he wants to understand it. And that's what it means, seal the testimony. You get the idea of this. When the unbelievers read the Bible, it's in code to them. When we talk about the Bible to them, it's a strange thing because they don't know how we get the things that we get. To them, it seems like it has to be fake because there is no way we can make these leaps from what we get to where we get to. And they don't get it, right? To them, they're like, how did you get there? Where did this come from? It reminds me of the Pharisees. They oftentimes will say, where did this man get this learning? And they will say that often. People in the world, they say that in many different ways. Where did you get that confidence from? Or where do you get this peace from? Or where do you get this? Or where do you get this? Why are you so happy? Why are you so this?
Mm-hmm.
They say that often, and what they really mean is, I don't get it. I don't get it. Now, you could be telling them till you're blue in the face. They won't get it. Why? Because the word is sealed. The word is sealed. And all we can do is hope that God will open their eyes. Because if God didn't open their eyes, there is no unsealing. Here's another one. I will wait for the Lord who is hiding his face, and I will hope in him.
Mm.
I will wait on the Lord who's hiding his face, but I will wait on him. There's another passage. That again, that it's a strange thing again. He's playing with us. This whole passage, he's playing with us, isn't he?
Mm.
He's doing these tricks with it. You're like, wow, how is he? How can we wait on a God who hides his face? But who's he hiding his face to? Not to everybody. Are the things that God do, are they clear to the unbeliever? They're not clear.
Mm-mm.
Verse 18 is kind of a play. Because we know what happened at the beginning of the chapter. He says, behold, I and my children, are whom the Lord has given me, are signs. Now that's a play on Isaiah in some senses, right? Because his kids got what kind of names? Prophetic names, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's another way of saying all the people who obey and follow the teachings of the Lord, they are what? They're signs. They're signs that God is doing what he's doing and that his plan is proceeding the way he wanted it to. Every time that we meet somebody that gets saved, it's a miracle to me. It's the reason it's a miracle is because there's so many fakes. Sometimes you see so many fakes that when you see somebody that's real, it's shocking to you. And that's why salvation, even if you see it 1,000 times, it will not stop being shocking to you because you still would see 10 times that many fakes. On a good day, right? It's a good day to catch a 1 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
It's way higher than that. The numbers are way worse than that, right? When you find a true believer, you be like, whoa, this dude is for real. This lady really believed. Yeah, you know, I used to do that, but I don't do that no more. Why? Well, you know, God don't want me to do what? You actually got standards? You believe in something? Right? It's shocking. Y'all ever seen that? Y'all meet somebody, you're like, whoa, this person really believes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what's encouraging about getting together on Thursdays or going to church. We need that because if you don't see believers enough, you almost start to wonder if they even exist. You look at the media long enough, you start to think, we must be nuts. We must be idiots. Believing this stuff. Nobody else believes it. Then you start making fun of them. When they say to you, inquire the mediums and necromancers who chirp and mutter. Right? What do necromancers and stuff do? They do strange things to try to hear from the dead. And he said, should you ask for the dead on behalf of the living? That's a strong argument, right? What do the dead have to do with the living? But again, to the testimony, to the teaching and the testimony, if they will not speak according to this word, it is because they have no dawn. In other words, they will never escape from the darkness. At the end of the passage, he says it again. They will be thrust into thick darkness. What's the curse that they have had? When they are hungry, they will be enraged. One thing that I notice about the unsaved is that they're always hungry. In the sense that I mean that is, they always want something to be fulfilled with, but they never can be fulfilled. You could say they're always lustful because they always think that whatever they're going to have is going to satisfy them, but it never does. No relationship can satisfy them. No, children, they have many different escapes. But at the end of the day, those escapes don't fill the void. All right, any comments or questions before we go into chapter 9? All right, let's read the first 7 verses of chapter 9.
But there will be no more gloom for her who was in anguish. In earlier times, he treated the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali with contempt. But later on, he shall make it glorious, by the way of the sea, and on the other side of the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. Those who live in a dark land, the light will shine on them. You shall multiply the nation. You shall increase their gladness. They will be glad in your presence, as with the gladness of harvest, as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. For you shall break the yoke of their burden and the staff on their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, as at the battle of Midian. For every boot of the booted warrior in the battle tumult, and cloak rolled in blood, will be for burning, fuel for the fire. For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will rest on his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. There will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this.
All right. It's a contrast to the end of chapter 8, right?
Mm-hmm.
When he says they will be thrust into thick darkness. Then he says in verse 9, but chapter 9, there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. Now, why that? Now let's think. What do people who are in the Gospels, what are they often called Jesus? They give him a title. Anybody remember they said Jesus of
Nazareth?
Yep, or Jesus of Galilee, right? Jesus of Galilee. And these prophecies are talking about what land? Galilee, right? Galilee. Galilee was not known for being very notable in the Old Testament. So that's why we could talk about it now, but back then they would have been like, what's so special about Galilee? It would be like talking about lacrosse, right? Like, it's not something that you don't know about, but it's not something that you would like expect some great thing to happen there. It's just lacrosse. It's just a middle class city. It's not terrible, but it's not notable. It's just lacrosse. So he started to talk about this land and this land by the sea. And if you ever notice, Jesus, when he called his disciples, what were they all doing? Basically, all of them was fishermen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Almost every single one. You got 4 of them at least that we know that was fishermen.
Mm-hmm.
And even Jesus was oftentimes in the boat fishing. How many stories of Jesus in a boat? So Jesus is often by the Sea of Galilee. He's often in the land of Galilee. All his disciples appear to be from Galilee. Now, when they went to Jerusalem, in some senses, that was like going to a new neighborhood. So when you think about Jesus' ministry, where was it started at and where was it based? It was based in Galilee. They called him Jesus of Nazareth. Nazareth in the area of Galilee. All these dudes around this body of water, Galilee. And he used that body of water to travel all around that body of water. That's where he mainly did his ministry. And he did some ministry in Jerusalem, but not, it seemed like there was a lot more near Galilee, right? But when you look at Galilee, where it really was more in northern Israel. And it was not in a godly area. That was not somewhere that anybody would have thought a godly revival would have been. Nobody would have thought that that's where God's son would live. You would think he'd be born in the line of the priest, or he'd be, but he was still the son of David. But in Galilee, what's so special about that? And so he starts to describe this prophecy about Jesus. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, to them has light shone. Maybe is that how Jesus was able to impact those people in Galilee so much that they didn't even think that they had religious hope? Had they gone so far, had they been seen themselves as insignificant, and then the Son of God was there? And he talks about breaking this burden, and all these prophecies that you get the idea very clearly of Jesus, right? Breaking the yoke of sin, opening the eyes from darkness to light. Now, some of these prophecies haven't been fulfilled yet. For every boot of trampling warriors in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will burn as fuel for fire. That's similar to taking the swords and beating them, right? And getting rid of the spears and turning them into farming tools. So you get this idea of Jesus transforming the world. Any other comments or questions on that part?
This is the whole part that Chantel read, that part?
Mm-hmm.
I just love her, like he shall reign forevermore. And she read, and just thinking about who he is, and he will one day, we do have that to look forward to. And that's like our hope, you know? Hope that will be fulfilled. And there won't, and there won't be any need for hope in heaven. I think you said that before in Romans class. But it's like hope we need it now, that hope will be fulfilled then.
Well, especially where it says uphold it with justice and righteousness, and it's like right now there's so much lawlessness out there. It's just like I'm waiting for the day where the justice will be forevermore, because it's the only justice that's ever gonna come is through Jesus.
That's so true. You talk about the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. And we just get this, I think, sitting on the throne of David, this idea that there will be this greater king, right? Now, when Isaiah had them, they still had good kings to come. But though no king could ever match up to the idea that when they first established a king, they thought a king was going to do. Nobody ever reached that standard. And now we have this promised king. All right, let's read. What we'll do here, I know this will go over the chapter, but what time is it?
8:11.
8:11. Okay. So we'll read from verse 8 all the way to chapter 10, verse 4. Because you'll see why when you see there's this phrase that keeps on going at the end where it says his hand is stretched out still. And that phrase continues into the beginning of chapter 10. So let's read that passage there.
The Lord sends a message against Jacob, and it falls on Israel, and all the people know it. That is Ephraim and the inhabitants of the Samaria, asserting in pride and in arrogance of heart. The bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with smooth stones. The sycamores have been cut down, but we will replace them with cedars. Therefore the Lord raises against them adversaries from Rezin and spurs their enemies on. The Arameans on the east and the Philistines on the west, and they devour Israel with gaping jaws. In spite of all this, his anger does not turn away, and his hand is still stretched out. Yet the people do not turn back to him who struck them, nor do they seek the Lord of hosts. So the Lord cuts off head and tail from Israel, both palm branch and bulrush, in a single day. The head is the elder and an honorable man, and the prophet who teaches falsehood is the tail. For those who guide this people are leading them astray, and those who are guided by them are brought to confusion. Therefore the Lord does not take pleasure in their young men, nor does he have pity on their orphans or their widows, for every one of them is godless and an evildoer, and every mouth is speaking foolishness. In spite of all this, his anger does not turn away, and his hand is still stretched out. For wickedness burns like a fire, it consumes briars and thorns. It even sets the thickets of the forest aflame, and they roll upward in a column of smoke. By the fury of the Lord of hosts, the land is burned up, and the people are like fuel for the fire. No man spares his brother. They slice off what is on the right hand and are still hungry, and they eat what is on the left hand but are not satisfied. Each of them eats the flesh of his own arm. Manasseh devours Ephraim, and Ephraim Manasseh, and together they are against Judah. In spite of all this, his anger does not turn away, and his hand is still stretched out. Woe to those who enact evil statutes, and to those who constantly record unjust decisions, so as to deprive the needy of justice and rob the poor of my people of their rights, so that widows may be their spoil, and that they may plunder the orphans. Now what will you do in the day of punishment, and in the devastation which will come from afar? To whom will you flee for help, and where will you leave your wealth? Nothing remains but to crouch among the captives or fall among the slain. In spite of all this, his anger does not turn away, and his hand is still stretched out.
What is the theme of the passage?
His anger does not turn away, and his hand is still stretched out.
Yeah. Now, one thing I know, and this is, Isaiah writes beautifully, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He writes so beautifully. The first part of it was just so beautiful. It was positive. But now this is writing beautifully, and this is like, it's poetically, but it's angry. It's devastating. The first thing he do is he stamped all over their pride. He said, somebody in there was trying to encourage them. You could tell because he got a specific, but he mocks them. But I think he probably said it better than even they said. But the idea is, they said, oh man, somebody burned down our house, we're going to build a mansion. That's the kind of stuff that they were saying. He's like, no. Now you got to think about what he's saying here, because remember in the passages before, Israel was thinking of Syria as one of their allies. But he said the Lord raises adversaries of Rezin against them and stirs up the enemies. Rezin is in Syria. The Syrians on the east and the Philistines on the west devour Israel with an open mouth. What's the first judgment? Nations turn against them. And God is still not satisfied with that judgment. It's going to get worse. That's the idea of it right there. The idea is God is judging you, but it's going to get worse. What's the second one? They didn't turn to the Lord who struck them. God slapped them. Now they turn into somewhere else. The idea of Scripture, and this is, I know it's hard for people in the world to understand it, but we understand it. The idea of the Scripture is we should turn from God to save us from himself. Right? People often say, well, I got to save me from my sins. You got to save yourself from the wrath of God. It ain't the devil that's running hell. It's God that's running hell. You got to be saved from God's anger. And that's more scary. So what's the next one? They didn't turn to God. So then God cuts off the head and tail. Then he started describing who the head and tail is. He started mocking the false prophets, right? Who's the tail? The false prophet who tells lies. Those who guide the people have been leading them astray. Therefore, God doesn't rejoice over the young men. You would think that if you looked at a boy, and you see a young boy, oh, that's cute. A young girl, oh, that's cute. God said, no, not me. Because everybody is godless and an evildoer. But what does that lead to? Everybody speaks folly. There's another, you can look at this in two ways. One is being evil and godless leads you to speak foolishly. Or being foolish is a sign of the fact that you are godless. One of the two. Foolishness grows in a society that leaves its God. And so when you leave God, you are left with a lack of intelligence. In other words, the second judgment is stupidity. Right? You would think if you had enough intelligence, you'd be able to climb out of this, but God takes away the intelligence. And even with that, God is not satisfied with his judgment. Now the third one is, wickedness burns like a fire. And the image that he creates is kind of funny, because it's almost, you get you ever watch like a video, almost like when you watch a Dumbo video and you'll see an image morph into some other image. The first one he says, wickedness burns like a fire. You get the idea of wickedness turning into a fire, but now it's an actual fire. In other words, your wickedness may be like considered like arson, but now that wickedness is burning down the country literally because the fires of war have consumed it. Forests are getting burned down, houses are getting burned down. Through the wrath of the Lord of hosts, the land is scorched. And what he's trying to get them to understand is the things that you physically see has a spiritual cause. Right? It will be like going to an American and saying the inflation that you see now is a judgment of God on you. You might say, well, no, it's based on these policies, it's based on that. But those are stupid policies. But couldn't anybody with any intelligence see that those are stupid policies? So why did they do them? It was the judgment of God. The people who did the stupid things, they're smarter than me and you. Let's just be blunt. They got more degrees than me and you. They're more accomplished than me and you. They got more political power than me and you. They get to speak to the news media every day. People care what they think. They don't care what me and you think. But at the end of the day, they still did stupid things. God judges them even with all their intellect. They still can't fight against the judgment of stupidity. So then the fires of war come. The other thing that you get, and this is a crazy image, the people try to eat and they are not satisfied. Then they think they're eating meat. But what are they really eating? They're eating their own arm. Could you ever be satisfied if you ate your own arm? Right? That would be the height of inefficiency, right? But the idea that somebody thinks they're eating food but they're eating their own arm is scary, right? It is super scary. It kind of reminds me of the thought, did y'all ever heard of how like Eskimos can sometimes kill a wolf? They'll freeze blood and put it on a sharp thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the wolf is licking the blood and they don't realize it, but as they keep licking, their tongue is they eating their own blood. And after a while, they kill themselves through their own bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea we get here. You think you eating something, you eating yourself. Manasseh devours Ephraim. Ephraim devours Manasseh. And together they devour Judah. Which is Jerusalem. And all this, God's still not satisfied. Woe to those who change the law. Woe to those who have wicked law, right? Mm. Now we're looking at another judgment. And it's not necessarily saying that God is it's hard to say whether this is a judgment from God or whether God is reacting to what is happening and saying, I'm judging you even worse because of this. But the idea that some people have is, how can we put it? There's a thing in video games called lawful evil. It's a thing where there are characters who are evil, but they still obey the law. So what they'll do is they will sometimes manipulate the law or use the letter of the law to do as much evil as they can. Some of these characters will change the law. There is a certain type of evil person that still wants to be legitimate. Think of a person who got gay marriage. Why do you even need to be married when you're gay? Right? What child are you protecting with your marriage? In fact, marriage is meant to establish families. So what are you doing with your marriage? You ain't accomplishing nothing, right? Why are they doing it? Because they want an aura of legitimacy. They want to change the law. Why does a man need to be able to go to a ladies' bathroom and call himself a woman? Why does that need to be a law? If they really believed it that much, why wouldn't they just be satisfied with the fact that they believe it? Right?
So, yeah, they want to try to calm their conscience down.
Yeah, they think that if they change the law, it will give them legitimacy. But the problem is, even in doing that, they're biting their own arm. And I think that when we look over history and we see people who've gotten sex changes and things, I think we won't be shocked, but I think the world will be shocked. How many of those people commit suicide and have other issues, mental issues? Because when they realize that changing their gender still won't make them happy, what's left? What's left? Another thing I don't get is, how is that not sexual appropriation? That's another thing I don't get that. Like, if I went there and I tried to, if I went in and I had a Japanese robe and I started talking all that, people are like, that's cultural appropriation. How is it if I dress like a woman, that's not sexual appropriation? I don't get that. What is it?
You're talking about that at work. I said, but if you were to say you identify in any other kind of way, it would be extremely offensive. I was talking to a man. I was like, if you tell me as a white man that you completely understand what it's like to be a black woman, because it's like that would be offensive, wouldn't it? He's like, yeah, why would I say that? I'm like, but take black off, that's okay.
Yeah.
Somehow that's not offensive for some reason. But what I was going to say too is, like, I think the Bible makes it clear that something the world tries to act like is true. Legality and morality are two completely different things. Mm-hmm. Being lawful doesn't mean being righteous.
Yep.
There's a lot of laws that, it's not illegal to live with your boyfriend or girlfriend. It's not illegal to have sex before marriage, gay marriage or not.
Yep.
It's a lot of things that are against God's law, but that are allowed by American law. Mm-hmm. So they try to legitimize their sin by saying it's okay, because the government said it's okay. A government does not establish righteousness. Yep. In fact, you can see this here. It's like there are people who have enacted evil laws.
Yes.
That in their society, this was okay, according to their laws. And God said, no, it isn't.
Yeah, and it's hard when you talk to so many people because they have so little logic. Mm-hmm. But one of the things you could just tell them is, is law mean morality? Then does that mean slavery was right? Mm-hmm. Until the language. Then what would be be the moral justification for changing any law if law establishes right?
Mm-hmm. How could you change that? How did you change what's right and wrong?
Yeah. It's just something that they don't recognize. But then there's another question of this. We innately understand, even if you can't philosophically think of how to get there, you innately understand that laws should be moral, even if they're not. Which means you understand that morality is independent of human intention.
Mm.
You have to recognize that. You may not be able to logically get there on your own. The Bible has to help you. But you understand that God has established a moral law. And governments that go against that law are enacting bad law. But it's hard for them to get it. Anyways, we'll stop there today. The rest is about Assyria. So we're looking and we're seeing how God is going to use Assyria to judge. But then we're going to turn around and see how God is angry at Assyria for how they think about themselves being used. And this is complex. That's why I love Isaiah. Isaiah's deep, right? He really is deep. Because these word images and these things, you like, whoa. They think they eating a sandwich, they biting their own arm. That's a crazy image, right? But then the next one, he's going to talk about, yeah, you think you judging the people, and now you think it's you. No, it's not you. Because of the way you think about yourself, I'm going to judge you for that. All right.
I was thinking that we have to be careful as Christians that we don't get caught up in that, and especially I say this for myself, but like especially with the holiday season, the materialism of it, like in the way that we push things, is like it's not all about just continuing to feed the monster of unsatisfied things. Like it's like always going to the next thing, the next thing, and just look, trying to make sure that we are looking into the hope of Christ going back, but then also doing what we're supposed to do here now and enjoying what we have right now, like being content.
Yep.
And being satisfied in that and not feeling like we have to get the big buys or the big, even those things. So we have to be careful to watch ourselves, especially, I feel like for me, especially this time of year, it creeps up.
Yeah, you would hope that the lesson of Thanksgiving would float into Christmas, but Black Friday has tried to kill Thanksgiving before it could even root in people's hearts, right?
Well, and I think the thing I was noticing, I've never felt like my attention has been so asked for. It's like it is now, because I got 4. So all of you 3 have that, or Michelle too, but you 2, and then Charmon's got her other things that vie for her attention. But the other thing I've noticed is it's not just the children or the other things, the radio, it's the emails, it's the ads on Instagram. It's like it's constantly, look at me, want. And we can just continue to chew like what this is talking about. Yep, and keep thinking like, oh, and you're really just biting yourself. You're just hurting yourself. And I thought to myself, I not only have a new life to take care of, so that's an extra noise, but I put the noise in front of me a lot too.
But isn't that a perfect picture of the social media culture?
Mm-hmm.
Of you destroying yourself to try to fill yourself?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like that's really what he's saying. Like nothing. This isn't anything new.
Yeah. And so I just want to remind myself of that, and us as believers to, if we have to put it aside in an app or whatever it is, like say like when you take a break or.
All right. Well, let's close up in a word of prayer. Heidi, can you close this, please?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this night. We thank you for all the little lives here tonight, Lord, too, and that come every week with their families. We pray that they would see the faithfulness of their parents, Lord, and that they would see the true faith that we have, Lord. We thank you for Brian always bringing a lesson faithfully. We thank you for all those who come and pitch in. Thank you for Charlotte making the meal tonight, Lord. We pray for those who aren't able to make it. Michelle and Jenny with their car difficulties, and Nick not feeling well, Lord. Aaron traveling, Jamar working. We just pray that you be upon them, Lord. Bless them. We pray that we can all be able to make it next week to celebrate Thanksgiving as friends, Lord, in Jesus' name.
Amen.